The wind on the plateau had a personality, and that personality was hostile. Dr. Sarah Vance had decided this approximately 47 minutes into the hike, right around the time a gust tried to yank her thermal scanner out of her hands and pitch it into the ravine they'd been circling for the past 3 hours. She caught it, barely, and shot a glare at the sky as if the weather might apologize. "Remind me why we're out here again," she called over her shoulder to Hayes, who was struggling with a portable sensor array that kept beeping angry protests at the altitude. "Because you said, and I quote, geological anomalies are like cosmic Easter eggs, and I'm not dying without checking this one out," Hayes shouted back, his breath misting in the thin air. "I was drunk when I said that. You were presenting to the board of directors. My point stands. The scar, that's what the locals called it, the ones who lived in the valley settlements 50 kilometers away and spoke about this place the way people spoke about cursed burial grounds, was a geological impossibility. A perfectly straight ravine cutting through sedimentary rock that should have taken millions of years of water erosion to form, except there was no water source, never had been according to core samples. It dropped 300 meters straight down, narrow enough that Sarah could almost jump across it if she had a death wish and excellent health insurance. She didn't approach the edge. She'd learned that lesson on Titan's ridges, thank you very much, and still had the scars to prove it. "Getting anything?" she asked, crouching to set up her equipment on a flat section of stone that looked like it had been polished smooth by something other than wind. Hayes waved his handheld scanner in a slow arc, frowning at the display. "Magnetic field's wrong. Like, really wrong. Hold on, that can't be right." Sarah knew that tone. That was Hayes's, "the universe is personally offending my understanding of physics," tone. She'd heard it twice before, once on Mars when they'd found water where there shouldn't be water, and once in his apartment when his smart refrigerator gained sentience and started ordering nothing but artisanal cheese. "Define, can't be right, in terms I can mock you for later. There's a stable electromagnetic field at the bottom of the ravine. Not geology. Technology." The thermal scanner nearly slipped from Sarah's hands again, this time without any help from the wind. "You're joking. Do I look like I'm joking?" She glanced at his face, which had gone pale except for 2 spots of red on his cheeks that had nothing to do with the cold. "Fair point. How stable are we talking?" 20-year-old stable. "The decay rate suggests whatever's generating it has been active since." He paused, fingers dancing across his display, then went even paler. 2005, October 2005. Something cold that wasn't the wind crawled down Sarah's spine. She pulled up her own historical records, the ones she'd downloaded on a whim when they'd first gotten approval for this expedition. Local news archives, government activity reports, anything that might explain why a ravine existed where it shouldn't. There. October 15, 2005. A single paragraph in a local paper, buried on page 7, Government Research Facility completes operations ahead of schedule. Officials decline comment on nature of work. Facility to be decommissioned. Hayes, did anything strike you as weird about the mission brief for this site? You mean besides the fact that they gave us full clearance with zero oversight and a budget that could fund a small Mars colony? Exactly that, yes. They stared at each other for a long moment, the wind howling around them like a warning they were too curious to heed. Sarah had spent 15 years in xenogeology, studying rocks on worlds that had never known human footprints, and she developed a sense for when the universe was about to get interesting in ways that would definitely void her insurance policy. "We need to go down there," she said. "I was afraid you'd say that. You're the one who found the signal. I'm starting to regret my competence." It took them 2 hours to rig the descent system, another hour to triple-check it because Sarah had a healthy respect for gravity and a deep-seated fear of becoming a cautionary tale. The ravine walls were smooth, too smooth, as if something had cut through the rock like a knife through synthetic butter. Her fingers found no purchase, no natural handholds, just that unsettling polished surface that made her think of industrial lasers and classified military projects. Halfway down, her headlamp caught something that didn't belong. A glimmer, a refraction of light that spoke of angles nature didn't favor. She stopped, boots braced against the wall, and adjusted her lamp. "Hayes. You seeing this?" His voice crackled through the crystalline formation. "Yeah, I'm seeing it. I'm also seeing readings that suggest it's not a formation. It's engineered." The structure, she couldn't call it anything else, emerged from the darkness like a secret the earth had tried to swallow. Hexagonal patterns, each edge perfectly aligned, creating a matrix that seemed to fold in on itself in ways that made her eyes hurt if she looked too long. And at the center, suspended in what appeared to be absolutely nothing, was a shape. A human shape. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me," Sarah muttered, but her hands were already working the descent mechanism, lowering her faster than was strictly advisable. Professional caution warred with the kind of curiosity that had driven her to study alien worlds in the first place, and curiosity was winning by a landslide. She touched down on a ledge that shouldn't exist, a platform of the same crystalline material that seemed to grow directly from the ravine wall. Up close, the figure was unmistakably a woman, suspended in what Sarah's scanner insisted was a localized stasis field of a design that wasn't in any database, government or otherwise. The woman's clothes were simple, dark pants, a shirt that might have been white once, now dulled by whatever process had kept her here. Her face was turned slightly away, dark hair drifting around her head as if she floated in invisible water. And her ears. Sarah's breath caught. They were long, sweeping back from her skull in an elegant curve that spoke of genetics that had never evolved on Earth. "Hayes," Sarah said quietly, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart, "you're going to want to get down here. Bring the medical kit. And maybe something stronger than coffee, because we're going to need it." The woman's chest rose and fell, almost imperceptibly. After 20 years of impossibility, she was breathing. The extraction took 6 hours, 3 broken sensor arrays, and what Sarah would later describe as an unreasonable amount of swearing in at least 4 languages. The stasis field didn't want to let go of its prisoner, pulsing with resistance every time they tried to interface with it, as if it had developed something approaching protective instinct over 2 decades of vigilance. "It's like trying to convince a very stubborn dog to drop a tennis ball," Hayes muttered, his fingers flying across a jury-rigged control panel they'd assembled from spare parts and desperate ingenuity. "Except the dog is made of exotic matter and the tennis ball is a living person. Have you tried asking it nicely?" Sarah suggested, wedging another power coupling into place. "I tried that an hour ago. I think it laughed at me." Can electromagnetic fields laugh? After today, I'm not ruling anything out. When the field finally collapsed, it happened all at once, the crystalline structure dissolving into particles of light that scattered like startled fireflies. The woman dropped 6 inches onto the platform, and Sarah lunged forward to catch her before momentum could send them both over the edge. She weighed less than expected, her body temperature somewhere between hypothermia and theoretically impossible. They brought her up in a rescue harness, Hayes climbing ahead to stabilize the pulley system while Sarah stayed below, one hand pressed against the woman's wrist, counting a pulse that beat in strange rhythms, 3 quick beats, 1 pause, 2 beats, longer pause. Not human, not quite, but close enough to make her chest ache with questions she didn't have vocabulary for yet. The outpost's medical bay had been designed for treating altitude sickness and the occasional bout of food poisoning, not alien women who'd been suspended in time for 20 years. Sarah laid her on the diagnostic bed anyway, watching readouts climb across screens in patterns that made the AI diagnostic system emit a confused chirp and request software updates it didn't actually need. "Vitals are stabilizing," Hayes reported, studying a display that flickered between standard medical metrics and symbols neither of them recognized. "Body temperature rising to something approaching human normal. Breathing pattern is, well, it's a pattern. Brain activity is off the charts. I mean that literally, she's registering neurological activity in ranges our equipment wasn't designed to measure." Sarah pulled up a chair, settling in for what her experience suggested would be a long wait. People didn't just wake up from 20-year naps feeling chipper and ready for breakfast. But the universe, as she'd learned repeatedly throughout her career, had a fondness for proving her assumptions catastrophically wrong. The woman's eyes opened exactly 14 minutes later. They were brown, or had been brown once, before something rewrote the rules governing human pigmentation. Light moved in them like oil on water, iridescent patterns swirling across iris and pupil both, creating the unsettling impression that Sarah was looking not at eyes but through windows into somewhere else entirely. The woman's mouth moved, shaping sounds that came out as static and mathematics, a language that made the air between them feel thick and resistant. Sarah's translation earpiece, standard issue for international research teams, squealed in protest and started spitting out fragments, falling, betrayal, cannot, sky-breaking. Hey, it's okay, Sarah said, hands raised in what she hoped was a universal gesture of non-threat. You're safe. You're in a research outpost. We pulled you out of that ravine. Well, out of the stasis field in the ravine. The timeline's a bit complicated. The woman's gaze fixed on her, those impossible eyes tracking across Sarah's face with an intensity that suggested she was reading information printed on a level Sarah couldn't perceive. When she spoke again, the words came out clearer, her vocal cords remembering or relearning how to shape human phonemes. How long? The question emerged in English, but wrong English, each syllable weighted with harmonics that made Sarah's teeth ache. 20 years. Give or take a few months. It's 2025. October. Something flickered across the woman's face, an expression Sarah couldn't parse. Not quite grief, not quite relief. Maybe some alien emotion humanity had never needed to name. They thought I would die. They wanted me to die. Who did? Who put you down there? The woman tried to sit up, failed, her muscles remembering weakness. Hayes moved forward with a scanner, but she flinched away from it with a speed that shouldn't have been possible given her condition. The movement sent medical sensors into alarm, and Sarah waved Hayes back with a look that promised explanations later, maybe, if they survived long enough for later to matter. We're not going to hurt you, Sarah said, keeping her voice level. I'm Sarah. That's Hayes. We're scientists. Geologists, technically, but we've always been overachievers. What's your name? The woman's expression suggested the question didn't translate properly, or maybe that names worked differently where she came from. I don't remember. They called me Subject 7. Before she closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, the iridescence had dimmed slightly. Before the cliff. Okay, Subject 7 is absolutely not happening. That's dystopian nightmare fuel, and I refuse to participate in that particular trope. Sarah leaned back, affecting a casualness she absolutely didn't feel. How about we call you something less horrifying? Nova work for you? After the stellar phenomenon. They're bright, they're explosive, and they fundamentally change everything around them. The corner of the woman's mouth twitched. Maybe a smile, maybe muscle memory of something like a smile. Nova. Yes. Better than a number. Hayes cleared his throat, the universal sound of someone about to introduce a problem everyone would rather ignore. Sarah, the government drones are going to arrive within the hour. The moment we activated emergency medical protocols, we pinged the oversight network. Standard procedure. Standard procedure for human emergencies. I'm going to go out on a limb and guess our friend here doesn't quite qualify. Exactly my point. When they get here and find out what we pulled out of that ravine, they'll put her back, Nova interrupted, and her voice carried certainty that came from experience rather than speculation. Or somewhere worse. They've had 20 years to refine their methods. Sarah looked at her, really looked at her, taking in the alien ears and impossible eyes and the way she held herself like someone who'd learned that hope was a luxury she couldn't afford. Something in Sarah's chest, the part that had driven her to study distant worlds because Earth's injustices felt too heavy to carry, made a decision that her rational mind would probably regret in approximately 10 minutes. Hayes, how much do you like your job? He stared at her. Sarah, no. Whatever you're thinking. Because I'm about to do something catastrophically stupid, and I need to know if you're the type to report me or the type to help me steal a shuttle. The silence stretched long enough for Nova's eyes to flick between them, reading dynamics and loyalties in the space where words weren't. Finally, Hayes sighed the sigh of a man watching his retirement plans evaporate. The supply shuttle's fueled and ready. But I'm driving. Your piloting makes me nervous. That's fair, Sarah admitted, already moving toward the equipment lockers. Nova, can you walk? The woman swung her legs off the bed, wobbled, caught herself. I can try. Good enough. Welcome to the Resistance. It's poorly organized and we're making this up as we go, but at least the company's interesting. The shuttle's interior smelled like recycled air and the particular brand of institutional cleaning solution that suggested someone had committed crimes against hygiene in here recently. Sarah strapped herself into the co-pilot seat while Hayes ran through pre-flight checks with the grim efficiency of a man who'd accepted that his life had just taken a sharp left turn into federal prosecution territory. Nova occupied the passenger compartment behind them, her hands gripping the safety restraints with enough force that her knuckles had gone pale. Sarah watched her through the cockpit partition, noting how those strange eyes tracked every instrument panel, every blinking readout, as if she could read the shuttle's intentions in its electrical patterns. You've flown before, Sarah said. Not a question. A long time ago. Different ships. Different sky. Nova's gaze drifted to the viewport, where the plateau stretched away toward mountains that cut jagged lines against the afternoon sun. We came in peace. That was our mistake. Hayes initiated launch sequence, and the shuttle's engines began their rising whine. Strap in tight, ladies. This is going to be what flight instructors call aggressive. Is that code for illegal? Sarah asked. It's code for, I'm about to make air traffic control very angry. The shuttle lifted with a lurch that sent Sarah's stomach somewhere in the vicinity of her spine. Hayes banked hard east, flying low enough that Sarah could count individual rocks on the mountainside, heading for the canyon systems where sensor coverage got patchy and the government had better things to do than monitor every cubic meter of airspace. So, Sarah said, once her internal organs had settled back into their proper configuration, what's the plan exactly? Because I'm usually better at the spontaneous theft portion of fugitive activity than the what comes next part. Free chain, Hayes said, threading the shuttle between two peaks that seemed closer together than architectural safety would recommend. I've got contacts. People who help researchers when their work gets too interesting for government comfort. You've been holding out on me. How long have you been involved with underground science networks? Since grad school. How do you think I got funding for that Mars water project? The official channels laughed me out of 3 committees. Sarah absorbed this information, recalibrating her understanding of Hayes from competent colleague to competent colleague with unexpected criminal connections. It was a pleasant surprise, actually. She'd always preferred her friends to have depth. Nova leaned forward, her face close to the partition. Your people help others like me. Others who don't belong. Not exactly like you, Hayes admitted, guiding the shuttle into a canyon so narrow that shadows swallowed them whole. Most of the people they help are human researchers who've discovered things that make powerful people nervous. But they operate on a principle of information freedom and scientific integrity, which I'm pretty sure extends to not letting the government disappear alien refugees. Refugees. Nova tested the word, turning it over like something fragile. Yes. That's what we were. My ship, she paused, and pain flickered across her features. We weren't explorers or invaders. We were running. Our world was dying. Consumed by something you'd call a spatial anomaly but we knew as the unmaking. It ate stars and planets and time itself. We sent out vessels hoping to find sanctuary. Sarah twisted in her seat to face her better. And instead you found us. Humanity. Let me guess, we responded with our characteristic warmth and hospitality by immediately imprisoning you. Not all of you. Some tried to help. There were debates in your governments, arguments about what we represented. Opportunity or threat. First contact or security risk. Nova's fingers traced patterns on the armrest, unconscious geometry that made Sarah's vision blur if she stared too long. The ones who saw us as opportunity won. They said we'd be kept safe, studied gently, that our people would be given asylum once the proper protocols were established. But that's not what happened, Hayes said quietly. No. They separated us. Took us to different facilities. Said it was for quarantine purposes, but the walls were too thick and the questions too invasive. They wanted to understand how we perceived time, how our minds worked. They thought if they could extract that knowledge, weaponize it. Her voice cracked, and she pressed a hand to her temple. I remember the facility. White walls. No windows. And him. Him. Sarah prompted. The commander. He wore medals but no nameplate. Said we were insurance, that our abilities would give your people the ultimate strategic advantage. We could see possible futures, trace probability lines through time like you trace roads on maps. He wanted that power. When some of us refused to cooperate, when we tried to resist, Nova's hand dropped to her lap, curling into a fist. He made examples. The shuttle broke out of the canyon into open sky, and Hayes immediately dove into another corridor of stone and shadow. Sarah's scanner showed 3 drones on intercept courses, still distant but closing fast. Government hardware, the expensive kind that didn't show up on civilian tracking systems. They're following us, she reported. Multiple pursuit units. Hayes, please tell me your criminal friends have somewhere we can actually hide this thing. Denver. Old subway tunnels that got sealed after the 2019 floods. Free Chain converted them into archive storage and emergency shelters. If we can reach the entry point before those drones get a weapons lock, we'll be fine. And if we can't, then we'll be posthumously famous, which I suppose beats obscurity. Nova stood suddenly, swaying with the shuttle's movements but maintaining balance through what looked like sheer determination. She moved to the cockpit door, placing her hands flat against the metal. Those impossible eyes closed, and the temperature in the cabin dropped 5 degrees in as many seconds. I can help, she said. I can show you where to go. Not with words. She struggled for terminology. With trajectory. With time sight. If you let me touch the navigation system. Sarah and Hayes exchanged glances that communicated volumes about bad ideas and limited options. Sarah unbuckled, making her way back to Nova on legs that had gotten good at shuttle turbulence over the years. What do you need? Your hand. And trust, though I understand that's complicated. Sarah held out her hand, and Nova took it. The contact sent electricity up her arm, not painful but intensely present, as if every nerve ending had suddenly woken up and started paying attention. Images flooded her mind, not visual exactly, more like understanding translated into sensation. Flight paths that hadn't happened yet, probability clouds showing where the drones would be in 10 seconds, 30, 2 minutes. Alternative futures branching and collapsing with each decision they made or didn't make. Hayes, Sarah heard herself say, her voice sounding distant, when I tell you, bank left 42 degrees and drop altitude by 300 meters. The timing has to be exact. Sarah, what? Trust me. Or trust her. The subway tunnels smelled like decades of standing water and the particular funk of places humanity had abandoned to darkness and urban legends. Sarah descended the access ladder behind Nova, her boots finding rungs that were slick with algae and questionable biological matter she preferred not to contemplate too deeply. Hayes brought up the rear, sealing the entrance hatch behind them with magnetic locks that would theoretically keep government agents out for approximately 10 minutes if they really wanted in. Welcome to the glamorous world of scientific resistance, Sarah muttered, her headlamp cutting through darkness so complete it felt aggressive. Next vacation, I'm picking the destination. Nova reached the tunnel floor and turned in a slow circle, those eyes adjusting to the dark in ways that made Sarah suspect she was seeing more than visible light. People lived here once. Traveled through here. I can feel the echoes of them, their intentions pressed into the walls like fingerprints. That's either a beautiful metaphor or you're literally reading psychic residue, and I'm not sure which possibility makes me more uncomfortable. Both, Nova said, with what might have been humor. Your discomfort is efficient. Footsteps echoed from deeper in the tunnel, and 3 figures emerged from the darkness carrying lights that weren't headlamps but something that glowed with a softer, more organic quality. The woman in front stood nearly 2 meters tall, her hair shaved on one side and falling past her shoulder on the other, a tattoo of mathematical equations spiraling down her bare arm. "Hayes, you magnificent disaster," she said, her voice carrying the kind of warmth usually reserved for old friends or partners in crime. "When you pinged the emergency code, I thought you'd finally gotten caught smuggling data out of classified sites. I didn't expect," her gaze landed on Nova, and whatever else she'd planned to say evaporated. "Okay. That's new. Kira, meet Nova." "Nova, this is Dr. Kira Osei, quantum physicist, wanted by 3 governments, and apparently the welcoming committee for this particular corner of scientific insurgency." Kira approached Nova with the careful deliberation of someone who understood that first contact situations could go sideways fast. "The ears are striking. Genetic modification, or are we having a much more interesting conversation than I anticipated?" "The second thing," Nova said. "I'm not from Earth. Or I am now, but wasn't originally. The timeline is complicated. I love complicated timelines." Kira gestured deeper into the tunnel. "Come on. We've got a hab set up about half a click in. Food, medical supplies, and enough server capacity to make your government handlers weep if they knew it existed. You can explain over something that technically qualifies as coffee." The free chain hab turned out to be a subway station that had been converted into something between a bunker and a university library. Screens lined walls that still carried faded advertisements for products that hadn't existed in years. Server stacks hummed in climate-controlled cases, and what looked like a full molecular printer occupied one corner, currently extruding something that smelled like synthetic protein and optimism. A dozen people worked at various stations, their focus so complete they barely glanced up at the new arrivals. Sarah recognized the particular intensity of researchers who'd found problems more interesting than safety or sanity. She'd worn that expression herself often enough. Kira poured something dark and steaming into cups that had probably been stolen from a government cafeteria based on the official seal printed on the side. Sarah accepted hers gratefully, letting the warmth seep into hands that had gone numb somewhere between shuttle theft and tunnel descent. "So," Kira said, settling into a chair that had been patched with 3 different types of tape. "Start from the beginning. Or the middle. Wherever the story gets interesting." Nova wrapped both hands around her cup, steam rising to frame her face in ways that emphasized her otherworldliness. 20 years ago, my ship was destroyed. Your government claimed it was an accident, but I remember weapons fire. Heat and light and the hull tearing. We crashed in what you'd call the Pacific. Some of us survived the impact." "How many?" Sarah asked. 7. They recovered 7 of us alive." Nova's voice went flat, the effect of someone reciting trauma from a safe distance. "They separated us immediately. Said it was quarantine protocol, but the facilities we were taken to weren't hospitals. They were research installations. Military. I was brought to the plateau site. The one with the ravine." Kira leaned forward, her scientist's mind already organizing information into patterns. "What did they want from you?" "Time sight. The ability to perceive probability branches, to trace potential futures through the quantum foam of causality. My people evolved on a world where time moved differently, where past and future existed in a more fluid relationship than your physics typically allows. We can see," she paused, searching for words. "Imagine standing at a crossroads where all possible roads exist simultaneously until you choose one. We see the roads. All of them. The ones taken and not taken. Temporal superposition, Kira breathed. You're describing conscious interaction with quantum timeline branches. That's theoretically possible, but the military applications would be staggering. Perfect intelligence, absolute strategic advantage. Yes. The commander understood that immediately. He wanted us to look forward, to see enemy movements, political shifts, technological developments. He thought we'd be grateful for the opportunity to serve, to earn our sanctuary. Nova's fingers tightened on the cup. Some of my people cooperated at first, hoping that compliance would lead to mercy, to eventual freedom. But there was never going to be freedom. We were too valuable. And when we tried to resist, the lights flickered, all of them at once, and Nova's eyes flashed with that iridescent quality. One of the screens across the room suddenly displayed an image that made Sarah's blood freeze. The plateau facility, 2 decades past, soldiers dragging a younger Nova toward the cliff's edge while she fought against restraints that sparked with electrical suppression fields. Sorry, Nova whispered, and the image vanished, replaced by normal free-chain data streams. Sometimes memory leaks out. Especially strong memories. Traumatic ones. Hayes had gone pale. They executed you. Threw you off the cliff as a message to the others. Yes. But I managed something in those final moments, a desperate application of my abilities. I folded time around myself, created a stasis bubble as I fell. It was supposed to be temporary, just long enough to survive the impact. But 20 years suggests I miscalculated the power requirements. She looked at Sarah with something approaching gratitude. You freed me from my own desperate mathematics. The others, Sarah said. The other 6. What happened to them? I don't know. That's what terrifies me most. If they threw me off a cliff for resistance, what did they do to those who cooperated? Are they still imprisoned? Experimented on? Or, Nova couldn't finish the sentence. Kira was already moving, her fingers flying across a keyboard, pulling up files from archives that definitely weren't supposed to be accessible to civilian networks. If the government kept them, there'll be traces. Budget allocations, facility modifications, personnel transfers to sites with unusual security protocols. The free chain has been collecting leaked documents for years. If your people are still alive, if they're being held somewhere, we can find them. And if we find them? Hayes asked. Then we do what we do best, Sarah said, feeling that familiar rush of purpose that had driven her to study alien worlds in the first place. We ask complicated questions that make powerful people uncomfortable, and we don't stop asking until we get answers that don't require throwing people off cliffs. Nova stood, steadier now, her presence seeming to fill the room despite her relatively small stature. My people have a saying. Translated roughly, it means, the past cannot be unchanged, but the future is written in water. I fell 20 years ago. But I'm standing now. That changes everything. Water-based destiny sounds way more poetic than our version, Sarah observed. We mostly just argue about free will versus determinism and then give up and have another drink. Your species has excellent coping mechanisms. We've had a lot of practice being disappointing. The files Kira unearthed painted a picture Sarah wished she could unsee. Budget allocations coded as Temporal Research Initiative. Personnel transfers to a facility that officially didn't exist, buried 3 levels beneath what public records claimed was a decommissioned weather station in Montana. Medical requisitions for sedatives in quantities that suggested long-term induced comas. And references, carefully obscured but present for anyone who knew how to read between redacted lines, to 3 remaining subjects. 3, Nova said, her voice steady despite the way her hands trembled. Not 6. They killed the others. Or relocated them to sites we haven't found yet, Kira offered, but her tone suggested she didn't believe her own optimism. Sarah studied the facility schematics Kira had pulled from a whistleblower leak dated 6 months prior. The building sat on federal land, surrounded by 40 kilometers of restricted airspace and enough security to make a maximum security prison look casual. Getting in would require either a small army or a very stupid plan executed with absolute commitment to bad decisions. "I'm thinking stupid plan," Sarah said. "Armies are hard to coordinate, and I'm already wanted for shuttle theft. Might as well add breaking and entering to my resume." Hayes groaned. "Every time you say something like that, my life expectancy drops by approximately 5 years. Look at it this way, you'll have exciting stories for your inevitable memoir from prison." Over the next 3 days, they assembled a plan that relied heavily on Nova's abilities, Kira's access to security backdoors that technically constituted several felonies, and Sarah's growing conviction that sometimes the right thing and the legal thing existed in completely different galaxies. The facility ran skeleton crews on weekends, and their surveillance systems had a blind spot in the northwest quadrant that maintenance had reported but administration had ignored for 7 months. "Bureaucratic incompetence," Kira said with genuine affection. "The Resistance's best friend." They went in on a Saturday, Sarah and Nova dressed in maintenance coveralls that Kira had acquired through means she declined to specify. Hayes stayed with the shuttle, ready for an extraction that would either be heroic or very brief depending on how the next hour unfolded. Nova's time sight guided them through patrol rotations, her warnings allowing them to slip past security personnel who never quite looked in the right direction at the right moment. The facility's interior matched its schematics exactly, which Sarah found both reassuring and deeply suspicious. Organizations this paranoid usually had hidden layers. But Nova led them deeper, her abilities sensing something Sarah's instruments couldn't detect, a resonance, she called it, the quantum signature of minds like hers held in unnatural stasis. They found them in a sublevel that smelled like antiseptic and sins. 3 medical pods arranged in a circle, monitoring equipment casting green light across faces that were Nova's but different, 1 male, 2 female, their features carrying the same elegant alien architecture. Tubes and wires connected them to machinery that hummed with power, and Sarah's medical scanner showed brain activity focused entirely in regions associated with prediction and probability analysis. "They're dreaming futures," Nova whispered, her hand pressed against the nearest pod. "Forced to dream, to calculate, while machines harvest their visions and translate them into intelligence reports." Tears tracked down her face, and Sarah noticed they caught light strangely, refracting into spectrum patterns. "This is worse than death. This is theft of self." Alarms began wailing before Sarah could respond, red light strobing in patterns designed to induce panic. She'd expected this, had hoped for more time, but expected discovery. Kira's voice crackled through the calm. "Security's responding. You've got maybe 2 minutes before they lock down the facility completely." Nova's hands moved across the pod controls with certainty born from her species' instinctive understanding of temporal technology. The machinery recognized her, or maybe recognized what she was, because systems began shutting down in sequence, releasing their prisoners from induced sleep. The first to wake was the male, his eyes opening with the same iridescent quality as Nova's, confusion giving way to recognition. "7, he said in their musical language. "You survived. We thought." Later, Nova interrupted, switching to English. "Can you walk? We need to leave immediately." He nodded, and the 3 woke quickly, their bodies remembering consciousness with visible effort. Sarah handed out the spare coveralls they'd brought, her mind already calculating escape routes that had never been Plan A because Plan A had assumed they wouldn't trigger every alarm in the building. They emerged from the sublevel into a corridor filled with security personnel, and Sarah experienced the unique clarity that comes from knowing you're absolutely caught with no clever way out. But Nova stepped forward, and the other 3 moved with her, their hands joining in a formation that made Sarah's vision blur at the edges. The air grew thick, resistant, and time began behaving strangely. Security personnel moved in slow motion while Nova and her people existed in normal speed, creating a differential that shouldn't have been possible outside theoretical physics papers. They walked past guards who turned toward them with glacial slowness, their weapons rising but never quite tracking fast enough. "This is incredibly illegal," Sarah observed, jogging to keep up with Nova's group. Like, violating fundamental laws of physics illegal. Your laws, one of the other women said, her accent even thicker than Nova's. Not ours. We are not subject to your linear time while we choose otherwise. They reached the northwest entrance where Hayes waited with the shuttle, its engines already screaming readiness. The temporal effect collapsed as they boarded, time snapping back to normal speed with an almost audible crack. Bullets sparked off the shuttle's hull as Hayes launched, his piloting aggressive enough that Sarah briefly reconsidered her earlier confidence in his abilities. But they cleared the facility's airspace, then the restricted zone, vanishing into civilian flight corridors where government agents would have to justify their pursuit publicly. Nova sat with her people, their hands still joined, their conversation happening in that musical language that carried mathematics in its phonemes. What now? Hayes asked, once they'd reached cruising altitude and Sarah's heart rate had dropped below cardiac arrest levels. Nova looked up, and Sarah saw something in her expression that hadn't been there before, not quite hope, but maybe its cousin. Determination, perhaps. Purpose. Now we broadcast. Kira's network can reach millions, yes. We show them what was done to us. Not for revenge, but for truth. So your people can choose whether to be the species that imprisons refugees or the species that welcomes them. That's optimistic considering we've spent 20 years proving we're the first option, Sarah said. But you saved me. Hayes helped despite the risk. Kira and her network fight for knowledge even when ignorance is safer. Not all of you are the same. Nova smiled, and it transformed her face into something that transcended species barriers. That's what hope means. Knowing darkness exists but choosing to believe in light anyway. Sarah thought about her career studying alien worlds, always looking up and out, never quite believing Earth deserved her attention. But Nova had shown her something important, that sometimes the most alien thing you could encounter was the capacity for change in people who'd forgotten they could choose differently. All right, she said. Let's go make some powerful people very uncomfortable. It's basically my calling at this point. The shuttle climbed toward clouds that promised weather, and below them, the world spread out in all its complicated, frustrating, occasionally magnificent glory. Nova pressed her hand against the viewport, and Sarah saw futures reflected in her eyes, some dark, some bright, all of them possible. They'd fallen 20 years ago, but they were flying now. And that, Sarah decided, made all the difference.